Welcome to Melton Mowbray, a historic town in the northeastern corner of Leicestershire, world famous as the international home of the Melton Mowbray pork pie. We'll talk more about pork pies in a second, but there's even more to Melton Mowbray than that. Once located by the historic Great North Road that connected London with Edinburgh, this town was hugely popular as a home of the historic pastime of fox hunting, while the town today hosts a riveting collection of historic buildings, all of which have their own fascinating and surprising stories to tell. On this walk around the town centre, we'll pass the former house of Anne of Cleves, the wife of King Henry VIII, Melton Mowbray's ridiculously enormous parish church, and even learn about a popular phrase that originates in this town. But if you hear the words Melton Mowbray, one thing will pop into your head before all else: pork pies. Here on Nottingham Street, we find ourselves before Ye Olde pork pie shop, the oldest pork pie bakery in town. The building dates to the 16th century, but it's been a bakery since 1851, as the home of Dickinson and Morris, one of the original producers of Melton Mowbray pork pies. This bakery was one of a number that opened in the mid-19th century amid a pork pie craze that swept through Melton Mowbray. The sale of Melton Mowbray pork pies skyrocketed over the course of a couple of decades, taking the production of the pies to an industrial scale, which has ever since served as a major part of the local economy. But why exactly is Melton Mowbray so associated with the pork pie? Well, the story has everything to do with the town's geography and history. As we mentioned, Melton was once a cradle of fox hunting, attracting members of the aristocracy not just from across England, but from across the world. Easily accessible from London by way of the Great North Road, Melton Mowbray lay at the heart of a wide expanse of countryside, which became popularly used for hunting in the 18th century. That was centuries after the original birth of Melton Mowbray, which has been a busy market town in Leicestershire for the best part of 1,000 years. This stone cross roughly marks the site of one of Melton's medieval market crosses, but it was centuries later, in the Georgian period, that Melton's star really rose as the ultimate destination for fox hunting. On the high street here, we can see the old George Hotel, built in the Georgian period as this town began to see ever more passing traffic. Originally, this was opened as a coaching inn, much like an old-time service station that allowed travellers on the Great North Road to pull in for some food or to stay for the night. Those who came to Melton for fox hunting, however, would often stay elsewhere, before setting out for a long day in the countryside on horseback. And that's where the birth of the pork pie is said to come in. The pork pie is said to have served as a compact, easily transportable snack for hunters that was full of energy that would help them keep going through the day. Melton Mowbray has historically been surrounded by a high density of pig farms, meaning that pork was the ideal meat to pack inside a handcrafted pastry to serve to fox hunters and other visitors to the town. Some do dispute that as the origin for the Melton Mowbray pork pie, but there's no denying that the town is almost intrinsically linked with the pork pie, to the point that, since 2008, only pork pies made in this area are allowed to be named Melton Mowbray pork pies. Of course, Melton Mowbray pork pies are made in a particular way that sets them apart from all other pork pies, but we'll talk about how they're made a little later on. For now, as we approach the marketplace, let's take a look at where you'd find Melton on a map. As we mentioned, Melton Mowbray is located in the northeast of Leicestershire, in a rural area of the country, roughly 20 miles away from the cities of Leicester and Nottingham. However, about 1,000 years ago, Melton was by many measures a more important settlement than both Leicester and Nottingham, home to one of the earliest markets in England. In fact, Melton Mowbray's market, which was founded in the year 1077, is England's third oldest market. This cross, erected in 1986, marks the site of the town's old Buttermarket, while the cross we saw a minute or so ago was the site of the old Cornmarket. The town has always been an important place for the trade of food, and that remains the case today, with Melton Mowbray billing itself as the rural capital of food. However, the town is also well known for another reason, and it has to do with the building we can see here. The swan statue on this building belonged to the old Swan Inn, and is the only remaining part of the historic pub that stood on this site until 1985, when it sadly burned down. However, that wasn't the first dramatic incident of the Swan Inn's life, as in 1837 it was attacked by a group of drunken aristocrats. Led by the wealthy Marquis of Waterford, a group of friends arrived already sloshed after a day at the old Croxton Park races nearby. But when they arrived at the toll to enter Melton, they were denied entry. Keen not to let their day end up as a damp squib, they locked the toll-keeper away in his booth, and then set about painting the town red. Literally. One of the group found a pot of red paint somewhere, and together they went on a spree through Melton, painting the town red, with the Swan Inn a notable victim of their colourful rampage. So, that's where the phrase painting the town red is thought to come from, now used more commonly among stag do's in Las Vegas than members of the aristocracy in northeast Leicestershire. We now find ourselves on Church Street, where we're passing the old Courthouse, one of the oldest buildings in Melton Mowbray, dating back to 1550, and which was also once part of the old Swan Inn. However, if you're looking for historic buildings in the heart of Melton Mowbray, then look no further than the town's immense parish church, St Mary's. Dating at its oldest to the 13th century, St Mary's is the largest parish church in Leicestershire, and was recently beautifully restored in 2017. The size of the church is a symbol of the esteem in which this town was held in the medieval era, actually built using a plan more common for cathedrals, incorporating a number of features that you'd normally only find in a cathedral. It's a spectacular monument to the town, and its 100-foot tower can be seen right across Melton Mowbray, and even further afield. Today, St Mary's stands hemmed in beside the marketplace and Burton Street, once the main entry to the town centre from the south, and which we'll walk along in a few moments. On this side, however, we find ourselves in rather more calm surroundings, and just a few steps away from a collection of large parks operated by one of Melton Mowbray's local authorities. But one interesting thing about Melton Mowbray is that many of the local facilities are propped up by an organisation known as the Melton Mowbray Town Estate, which has existed in the town since the mid-16th century as an unusual part of local government. Founded in 1549 as a local charity, the town estate was a select group of people that within a few short decades effectively came to be the local government of Melton Mowbray. This remained the case well into the 19th century, although the town now has a directly elected borough council that's responsible for most of the facilities in Melton Mowbray. The estate still exists, however, and retains responsibility for the upkeep of local parks and the town centre in general, as well as running street markets, local fairs and other events. Now, having walked around the churchyard of St Mary's, we find ourselves beside the Anne of Cleves, another medieval building which was originally built in 1327. At the time, it was used by monks as a living space, but in 1540 it was given to Anne of Cleves, the fourth wife of King Henry VIII, as part of her divorce settlement with the king. Today, the building is a pub that bears the name of the former queen, but she wasn't the only major figure in the royal court to have owned this property. From 1538, the house was owned by one Thomas Cromwell, who was at the time one of the most powerful men in England, serving as Lord Chancellor under King Henry VIII. Cromwell rose to power through the 1530s after assisting Henry's separations from his first two wives. However, in 1540, he was executed on the orders of the king he had been so loyal to, after he had orchestrated Henry's marriage with Anne of Cleves, which turned out to be a disaster, lasting only 6 months. As we mentioned, the Anne of Cleves was originally used as a home for monks that served St Mary's Church. It's the oldest building on Burton Street, but it stands opposite another old landmark of the main route into Melton Mowbray, a row of almshouses built in 1640 for local pensioners. Of all the roads in Melton Mowbray, Burton Street here is said to be the best preserved, with most of its buildings retaining the appearance they held in the 18th century. Of course, that was during the town's heyday as a home of fox hunting, and just up the road from the almshouses, we can see the building that once hosted the Old Club, one of the most notorious hunting clubs in town. Founded in the early 19th century, the Old Club was where men would congregate before and after the hunt, dining, drinking, and gambling the night away. King George IV himself visited the Old Club a number of times, one of a number of English kings that have visited Melton Mowbray through history. Not all came for fox hunting, however. Burton Road here follows the boundary of the Great North Road, which a number of medieval kings, including Richard the Lionheart and John, travelled on as they entered Melton to stay at a castle that may have existed in the medieval era. Today, Burton Road remains an important route in and out of the town centre, though as you can see, it's rather busy with traffic. In fact, much of the town centre is often chock-a-block with traffic, as it's the place where 4 large A roads all converge, connecting the town in all directions with Leicester, Nottingham, Grantham and Oakham. The traffic has been a long-running topic of conversation in Melton, but after many years of waiting, it's expected that a bypass around the town centre will be built by the mid-2020s, which will free up central Melton from the busy jams that have always occupied its streets. As you can see, a number of the streets around the marketplace have been nicely pedestrianised, but we'll now make our way down King Street, another small shopping street, to have a look at a number of landmarks that occupy the northern side of the town centre. But as we do that, let's have a brief word about the origins of this town's name. Of course, Melton Mowbray is often followed by the words pork pie, but the town actually takes its name from a rather simple description of its geography, Melton being derived from the Old English Maidleton, which means the middle town, surrounded by a group of small hamlets. Passing by the Three Tuns, a former pub and brewery of the 19th century, Melton Mowbray was originally simply known as Maidleton, a name which evolved in other parts of England to be Middleton, or Milton, such as in Milton Keynes. The Mowbray part of the town's name was added on a little later, referring to one of the first lords of the Manor of Melton, Robert de Mowbray. After the Norman invasion of England in 1066, Robert de Mowbray became one of the country's most powerful lords, owning vast areas of land that included Melton Mowbray. However, he was ultimately jailed for rebelling against King William II and had his lands confiscated. The later owners of the land brought the name Mowbray back, giving us the name Melton Mowbray today. And speaking of the old lords of the manor, here we find ourselves at the rear of one of 2 buildings in the town centre, known as the old Manor House, this one said to have been built centuries ago, with no nails used in its construction. Surrounding the historic house now is a collection of rather more modern buildings, such as the Cutting Room, one of Melton's many local pubs that once belonged to the town's Regal Cinema, built in the 1930s. The cinema still operates today, albeit on a smaller scale, and we'll get a look at it after we take one last glance down King Street, and at the characterful shops and cafes that occupy this lovely part of the town centre. As you can imagine, Melton Mowbray is a town that's rather proud to be the home of the pork pie, and you'll see mentions of it all over the place. In fact, when you step off the train at Melton Mowbray railway station, you're immediately greeted with a large sign that tells you in no unsure terms that this is the home of the pork pie. Melton Mowbray is also the home of this wonderful Art Deco cinema, the Regal, which opened in 1933 and is still showing films to the townspeople in its cosy auditorium to this day. Just a little further along the road from the Regal, meanwhile, there's another Melton pub, the interestingly named Generous Briton, or the Jenny B, as it's locally known for short. I'm not sure who exactly the Generous Briton is or was, although there are 4 pubs which bear the name, all of which are located not far from Melton Mowbray. If you know the origin for the pub's name, do please share it with us. That brings us to the end of King Street, marked by the currently unused King Street building that was once a part of Brooksby Melton College. Many plans for a new use for the building have been suggested, including transforming it into a pie bakery, offering pie-making courses too. But what exactly is so special about Melton Mowbray pork pies? Well, similar to Stilton cheese, which we'll talk more about in a short while, the product is exclusively made in the area around Melton Mowbray, and is specifically defined by the way it's made. The crust of the pie is formed by hand, while the meat inside is chopped and uncured, giving it a distinctive grey colour. As in the story of the fox hunters back in the day, whereas many others are said to be designed to be eaten warm. Now out onto the busy Sherrard Street, we're passing the Black Swan, which has stood in the town centre for well over 100 years, and serves as another centre of Melton Mowbray's often lively nightlife. Nobody's actually painting the town red these days, but the pubs in town here remain a popular place for locals of all ages. From the heart of Melton Mowbray, we'll now walk along this street towards the edge of town, which is where we'll find one of just a few factories in England that produce official Stilton cheese, another famous export of Melton Mowbray. But before we move on to the cheese specifically, Stilton also played a role in the development of the Melton Mowbray pork pie. Stilton cheese production has been commonplace in this part of the country since the early 18th century, and locals would take the whey, a byproduct of the cheese-making process, and feed it to pigs, whose meat was then used to make pork pies. Pork pies and Stilton have gone hand in hand for centuries ever since, still appearing together on some forms of the traditional British ploughman's lunch, although there are endless variations on the meal that we don't have time to go into today. So, as a home of pork pie and Stilton production, Melton Mowbray undoubtedly earns its name as the rural capital of food, a moniker which has earned the town much attention in the modern day. But let's talk more about Stilton, which you might have logically thought originates from the Cambridgeshire village of Stilton. This is an interesting one, as while the name for the cheese certainly comes from Stilton, located about 40 miles southeast of here, it's thought that Melton was actually the place where the production of Stilton cheese began. Though the details on the origins of Stilton are a little sketchy, it's often said that a cheesemaker by the name of Francis Paulet, who hailed from the nearby village of Wymondham, was the first to produce modern Stilton, beginning around the 1720s. The cheese's association with the village of Stilton, however, comes from the fact that it was supplied from this part of Leicestershire to coaching inns in Stilton. People passing through Stilton would then buy the cheese there, likely assuming it came from the locale, and so christening it Stilton cheese. Breaking off briefly from the story of Stilton, we're now passing a place where you can learn more about the many fascinating stories to be found in Melton. The Melton Carnegie Museum, housed in the town's old Carnegie Library, which dates back to 1905. The museum is now a rather large operation, complete with exhibitions on stilton, fox hunting, pork pies, and a number of the lesser-known local industries, including shoemaking, saddle-making, and tinsmithing. Stilton production, being one of the more well-known local industries, continues to this day, and much like Melton Mowbray pork pies, this town is one of only a few places in the world which is legally permitted to produce Stilton cheese. There are only 6 producers of Stilton in England today, and due to a protected designation of origin, Stilton must be made in one of Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, or Derbyshire. Weirdly, that limit means that the actual village of Stilton, in Cambridgeshire, isn't allowed to produce Stilton cheese. This factory, here in Melton Mowbray, however, is producing Stilton as we speak. Officially known as a creamery, the factory has a long history in Melton Mowbray, and it once actually produced pork pies alongside Stilton. In 1966, however, the company decided to concentrate fully on Stilton, leaving pork pies to other bakers in Melton Mowbray. And as we look towards the makers of one of the town's most famous products, we've reached the end of our walk in Melton Mowbray, a fascinating town full of great stories and some world-famous exports. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're looking forward to visiting Melton Mowbray yourself for some Stilton and a pork pie.